Your first module and are beginning your second module for this course. Readings this week, slightly less, and no Bowman and Gallows in order to provide some space for writing the literature review. Please contact me with any questions in regard to that assignment specifically because it is so big. Viewing, and you will listen to an audio interview with Dr. Andrea Cook, the president of Warner Pacific. She has really flipped the typical model of higher education, so I hope you enjoy that audio interview. I'm really excited for you to get to hear from her. Respond, the Moodle discussion forum, and the initial submission of your literature review will be due at the end of this module. Plan, again, the optional assignments, depending on which you selected, second article review, the new version of the online enabler assignment. You may want to schedule interviews with administrators, and if you're doing the formation journal assignment, then the second journal submission needs to be completed. Our first topic that we will cover is enrollment. I used admissions there in parentheses because the two are often used interchangeably. If there is a distinction, it is typically in that enrollment is a broader use of the term, occasionally including admissions, multiple admissions offices even, for a traditional undergraduate student college, an adult or professional student college, a graduate college, seminary, but also occasionally financial aid, student accounts, maybe even marketing. Admissions is typically a more narrow interpretation, the actual admissions offices. That focus should be on recruiting, qualifying, admitting students. That seems obvious, right? But what is also as important is that we think about our goal being to admit qualified students, to admit prospective graduates, and not just all applicants for the purpose of growing enrollment. In my opinion, institutions have an ethical responsibility for adequately supporting and serving students who we admit to our college or university. So the really hard part about this is that it might mean not admitting a student who is not qualified, or admitting a student and being committed to that student's success despite the challenges, which might mean accepting an academically underprepared student and intentionally providing tutoring, mentoring, or writing or math support services to support these students through graduation. Or for veteran students, actually providing the mental health and career and counseling services to support their reentry. As an institution, we need to be committed to the idea that all of our admitted students will graduate. A college degree is a good investment, but the worst case scenario is if a student takes out loans and doesn't graduate. This person doesn't receive the employment benefit for hiring or promotions of having the college degree, but still has the monthly payment of attending college, like something that he or she will not be able to afford with the monthly income of a non-college grad. So this is an ethical dilemma, one that should be addressed with an institutional philosophy. And that changes the emphasis somewhat. It may create some challenges because admissions counselors have to balance the role of hitting their targets. Admissions is a highly metric-driven area. The future and fiscal health of our institutions rely on enrollment and these departments hitting these targets, but they also need to maintain a high level of quality in the students that they admit. One question you might want to consider asking an admissions administrator or professional, if you decide to interview one, is to ask, what is that balance for him or her? How do they maintain that balance? What does quality look like? Does quality of an entering class or cohort look different from one institution or one program to another? And how so? In the midst of the confluence of short and long-term trends currently disrupting the higher education landscape, how we think about and approach strategic planning has also changed dramatically. A decade ago, organizational strategic planning would have stressed effectiveness, and organizational effectiveness as the best means to foster mission success. However, enough schools have closed that we now question if simply being effective is sufficient. For example, do we think that if all of the higher education institutions of today offer the same degrees, same majors in the same delivery modalities with the same services or lack thereof, but we operate more effectively, that we will be successful in our mission. Maybe some can, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, but can, say, Metro State do this? A public college, not a research institution, and relatively without name recognition. In fact, many states have a public college named Metro State. Or any of the large number of private liberal arts colleges in rural America, with moderate endowments but surrounded by similar institutions, some of which have arguably more prestige and or larger endowments. The same could be said for Bethel. We have similarities with other local faith-based institutions, such as University of Northwestern, which is literally a mile away from our main campus, North Central University, Crown College, Concordia, also St. Thomas and St. Catherine, two Catholic institutions, not to mention Hamlin, McAllister, Augsburg, and then all of the public or for-profit institutions. So maybe we are uncertain about the idea that organizational strategic planning, through increased effectiveness, can ensure mission success, despite the fact that the previous edition of your textbook would have argued for that very concept. Or more precisely, maybe efficiency, and maybe that's the point of this edition, maybe efficiency cannot guarantee an institution's financial success, but organizational strategic planning and efficiency can still be very helpful, especially if used appropriately. And wait for it, strategically. Which is why these chapters on strategic planning and budgeting and academic management are so important. For the past few decades, strategic planning has become commonplace among higher education institutions, businesses too, to the point that now every institution has a plan, often in the form of a dusty binder on the bookshelf, or now maybe a website describing the strategic planning process, and occasionally, for the strongest plans, some standards or benchmarks, some specificity. Admittedly, I love the idea of strategic planning. One of my strengths is strategic. Strategy, efficiency, planning ahead, all of my favorite things. It makes the achiever in me so happy. This is how we are successful, right? However, I have been on enough strategic planning committees as an institutional employee, but also as a consultant on a team brought into an institution to create a strategic plan, to know that oftentimes a disconnect exists between the strategic plan and operational reality, or the tactical planning referred to on page 107. The official university stated values and aspirations for the future, and then the unexpected and shifting needs, demands, and opportunities of stakeholders, students, alumni, donors, boards, local companies, employers. This is the point made in the difference between an adaptive and interpretive plan. The day-to-day operations of the university. For example, if you review the strategic planning page for Bethel University, we explicitly state, in 2010, Bethel University adopted a strategic plan that included 4 foundational goals to accomplish by 2021. Every year, progress was made toward each goal as specific objectives and priorities were established. But during the 2013-2014 academic year, administrators' attention shifted from planning for the future to focusing on the present. So, what does that say about strategic planning? So back to the purpose of strategic planning. Ultimately, the purpose of strategic planning is to ensure the future mission alignment of an institution and the future institutional existence, financial viability. Through a process of assessment of the current state of the university, understanding where we are, create shared future goals, where do we want to go, and then determining how are we going to get there through institutional prioritization. For example, based on the market and enrollment trends, which majors will grow and which might need to be sunsetted, what departments need additional staffing, and which need decreased resource allocations, and a path for accountability and increased efficiency. The chapters in this book are very helpful because they fully integrate organizational strategic planning as an institutional prioritization aligned with the budgeting process and academic management and efficiency. I just wanted to stress the importance of operations and daily reality within the aspirational conceptualization of a strategic plan. So enrollment and strategic planning, those topics, questions, and concerns, are considerations of practitioners. This is the boots-on-the-ground perspective. In contrast, we are also reading Palmer and Zajonc, very theoretical, idealistic thinkers and writers. My challenge to you is, how do we connect the two? How might that connection look in a leader, a practitioner? Obviously, I think there's a strong connection between the two. The theoretical literature and the praxis-oriented texts or practitioner videos or articles. But I'm asking you to do that as part of the integrative process. So as we look at the Palmer and Zajonc texts for this week, the chapters are written by Zajonc. He is a physicist, and he will draw on his background in science to talk about insight and reflection in our work, pursuing integration and interdisciplinary work, and he will draw some parallels between inquiry in the hard sciences and connect that with the social sciences. Again, I suggest you be thinking about the connection between these theoretical constructs and leadership in a higher education institution. Zajonc is drawing from his field of physics, arguing that our historic rootedness in science can actually lead us to manipulating facts instead of looking for new possibilities. The new insights in the physics field are teaching us that we are actually limiting our own understanding by our preconceived notions. Friedman, in A Failure of Nerve, Leadership in the Age of the Quick Fix, a book I highly recommend, talked about the idea of a data deluge and how data, even the overwhelming amount of data that we have access to today, isn't helpful when we come to a scenario with our preconceived ideas. Similarly, this idea of confirmation bias, our tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of our existing beliefs or theories. This limits our ability to gain new insights and to make innovative, creative, or even simply appropriate and reasonable decisions sometimes. So, Zajonc says that colleges and universities need to encourage, foster, and assist our students, faculty, and administrators in finding their own authentic way to an undivided life. The reference to the undivided life related to an undivided life that we explored with Palmer previously. Then he goes on to quote Whitehead, stating a pedagogy anchored too strongly in tradition is bound to inert ideas. This is really an important point because we have become very ethnocentric on our ways of thinking about things. We have a strong reliance on Western traditions of knowing, logical argumentation, empirical study. And in decision-making, if we must manage data, think our strategic planning topics from earlier, right? And emotional response, our own, those around us, our stakeholders, simultaneously, then how we think becomes very important. Zajonc quotes the Dalai Lama saying, "Ignorance is the root cause of suffering, and the antidote is open-minded inquiry into the nature of reality." Zajonc states, if pre-commitments or fears dominate our thinking, we deny ourselves valuable avenues of inquiry and dismiss, for example, the thousands of years of contemplative exploration contained in the Asian tradition. The nice thing about living today is that our world is becoming so small and interconnected. We can be exposed, shaped, and learn from others with very different perspectives or traditions. Thinking historically, there are events or scenarios of which different people, smart people, good people, hold very different perspectives. Even thinking about issues within higher education, different people, again, good and smart people, even with the same evidence, the same basic set of facts, have different opinions, perspectives, and suggestions for amelioration. And that's okay if we can begin to embrace this idea of holistic thinking about things, looking at situations from both an emotional and a data processing point of view. We can really open up new possibilities in leadership. Zajonc goes on to talk about how shifting vantage points provides new insights into reality. the shift from the very object study of science to a more process study and more subjective study, you will see that we are seeing that shift happen. He talks about the connection between the observer and the observed. What a fascinating topic. In physics, quantum physics literature, our participation in observing reality actually changes the reality. Our observation of something actually changes its essence, and the significance of this is profound. You will recall in Zhejiang, whether we see light as a wave or a particle partially depends on what we go in looking for. That reminds us again that our questions matter. The questions that we ask will shape the answers that we get, or the questions that we don't ask. If phenomenon are co-created by observer and world, and both parts and wholes are critical pieces of understanding, and so both the deconstruction and the reconstruction, both the analysis and the synthesis, are very important steps for us to take. To avoid what Friedman, again referencing Friedman's book, calls imagination gridlock. To illustrate this, Friedman describes Christopher Columbus's finding of the, quote, New World. To Columbus in Europe, who were fixated on finding routes to the east, this landmass, America, was actually an island that was literally in the way of identifying that trade route to Asia. When explorers went expecting to see something, an island, that is what they found, even though it was actually a continent. But because they weren't looking for it, they obviously struggled to realize what they had found. And I use the word found, not discovered intentionally, obviously. But according to Friedman, the imaginatively gridlocked system is characterized by a continual treadmill of trying harder, assuming that failure is a result of not trying hard enough, or using the right strategy, or getting enough information. But this overlooks the possibility that our ways of thinking themselves are stuck in imagination gridlock, or that we are searching for new answers to old questions rather than an effort to reframe the questions themselves. So staying aware of our assumptions is very important in finding the right questions. Maybe even more important than finding the right answers is finding the right questions, or the best next question. The implications of this view of reality for education are great. It can pivot the entire mandate of university inquiry away from a privileged objectivity and material metaphysics to an egalitarian one of connection, relationship, and lived experience. This emphasis on integration, gaining knowledge in disparate fields, and community, capitalizing on multiple insights, and there is most certainly a paradigm shift toward this type of thinking. But you are still going to encounter vestiges of the old way of thinking, particularly in higher education, which is so steeped in tradition. Many in our field still think that quantitative research is the only way to do research and disregard a qualitative research design. Well, certainly as Zhejiang points out, qualitative social science has the challenge of accuracy and reproducibility. That is certainly true. But when the emphasis is on something entirely different, on process, relationship, then qualitative gets at those in a way that quantitative never could. So in your research courses, be aware of the difference in what the research methodologies are seeking. I know I am thankful for the more recent semi-acceptance of qualitative research and the insight provided by process and relationship. Finally, I will conclude with a few final reflection questions. One that I am thinking about or wrestling with, and I hope that perhaps you are as well. In regard to Zhejiang, what were some of the most transformative moments in your educational career? What characterized the instructors or the learning community? What bumped your elbow, as the Jonc said? And how do we, as educational leaders, begin to address the reductionism in education? What do you see as roadblocks in your own thinking, in the thinking of others? And then, overall, what would be gained if, as the Dalai Lama says, we were to cultivate a deep sense of caring for others based on a profound sense of interconnection? How does this inform or expand your thinking relative to admissions in higher education? Needs-blind, affirmative action, acceptance. How does this inform or expand your thinking relative to the strategic planning process in higher education? Academic efficiency, institutional prioritizations, etc. And the last quote that I'll leave you with, I love it. An epistemology of love bridges the divide between intellect and feelings, between objectivity and participation. Once knowing activates our feelings, we are moved to action. We move from being a bystander to being a neighbor or friend. Our intimate understanding of others and their needs prompts compassionate action.